but every opportunity I got to choose a module, I would narrow it down to earlier. I hated modern history. I didn't want to do politics. As fascinating, absolutely. I've read books about the wars and the 20th century and whatever, but what was interesting for me was the earlier history.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoy listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
This is Guy Milner. When I'm not running one-shot games at conventions, you'll find me listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. My guest today is Paul Baldowski. He's the writer of Cthulhu Hack and the Dee Sanction. He also did work on Symbaroum, Paranoia XP, Dracula Dossier, Trophy, and Maelstrom. He is a game fanatic, business analyst, father, and reader of sci-fi and history. Paul, welcome to the third floor.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad it's no higher than that. I suffer from vertigo.
So Paul and I, before we came on mic, were lamenting at my inability to understand how calendars work, and then our collective inability to understand how daylight savings and summertime and BST. But somehow, by some miracle, we ended up together. Paul, you're going to have to answer the question that you've answered a million times on every freaking podcast you've ever had to be a guest on. And that's really your origin story and how you found tabletop gaming. But I want to frame it maybe a little bit different. At some point, you knew nothing about this hobby. You knew nothing about being able to take a piece of paper, write some numbers on it, roll some dice, and pretend to be somebody else. Can you take me back to when this was first put in front of you?
So when it was first put in front of me as a defined and structured hobby, it would have been 1984, I think. I have often thought about this, and I think it was 1984. It was Redbox Basic D&D. And the key part of this is I was in secondary school, so I was like 12. And the key part of one of my key aims at the time, my motivation was to find a way not to spend any time out in the playground. It was wet. It was unpleasant. This is England. It rains most of the time. And so, it was definitely a key aim to find a way to get indoors at breaks. And I achieved that by joining the school's brass band. Under the guise of practicing musical instruments, we would sit in the back rooms and play games instead. So D&D was the first example of that. But I suspect what led me into that and being open to that was just a sort of creative streak from the outset, probably with things like Lego and, the normal childhood toys, sitting there and probably spending more time making my own creations than necessarily following the instructions. I recall my brother and I sort of creating streets and stuff out of random. So we'd be creating an environment rather than just creating individual models. So, but yes, then D&D was that first opportunity to try gaming.
So as an adult now, Paul, looking back, do you have a sense of where that energy comes from, that desire to grab a bunch of Legos and not read the instructions and build what it was built for, but to do your own thing with Lego, or to find a hobby that's so open-ended like RPGs? Do you have a sense of, again, as an adult, what was driving that as a kid?
I suspect it was probably nurture from my parents, both who were quite creative in their own ways. So my mother, while being a hairdresser, actually did painting and stuff in her spare time. My father was a training officer at an industrial plant. But nevertheless, he too had sort of an interest in the sort of more creative side of things. There were lots of examples at home of ornaments, which at the time I probably didn't think much of them, but they were like cannons and stuff that he had made on a lathe with like a plinth with a proper cannon with cannonballs next to it, which as a child, I probably didn't appreciate,
Right.
but later realized that he had made them as part of his apprenticeship in the place where he'd worked. So there was that creative streak, I think, which fed into this interest of going beyond just the box and the instructions and creating a story out of things as a more ready sort of step than just following the guidelines.
So we talked about Redbox and you escaping from the outside as part of this brass band secret gaming society in the back room. At what point do you feel like the hobby became something that you sought out versus something you used to escape another activity, right? So you did this so you didn't have to do something else. At what point do you think your passion ignited enough where you're like, I really like this?
So with school, I mean, there were probably only 3-4 years where we had that chance to. We stuck together as a small group. Basically, there were 4 of us. Occasionally, went up to 5 or 6, and we would play. But by 1988, 1989, that group had kind of begun to sort of scatter. But there was still the urge from me to carry on with that creative side of things. And I had a younger sister, and I had 2 older brothers, all of whom had their own things to do. And maybe at that point, as we were getting a little bit older, there was a reason to find other things to do. And at a very simplistic level, I did the tiniest little bits of maybe like acting or something. And when I say acting, it was doing a couple of comedy sketches in a school sort of a charity event, for example. And then I actually wrote a couple of very short sketches, which were really bad. And at least one of them was like a rip-off of a Monty Python sketch, which I probably hoped nobody would recognize because I think it was one of the ones that appeared on a cassette rather than on the TV show. So, and I'm said cassette, so I've immediately people are going, what's he talking about? What even is that? So, and I think therefore it out of that became more interest in that creative side of things, the storytelling, creating things from whole cloth, from nothing. And so towards the end of the 80s, once the gaming group had begun to disintegrate, I actually started doing play by mail, play by post. Yeah. Post as in, sending a letter, rather than the later play by forum type things, which obviously took off, much later. And so I came up with I actually wrote my first game at that point called Darklands, which I typed on a manual typewriter, the rule book. I think the rule book was like 40 or 50 pages of A4 typed sort of skill descriptions and character generation. And it was quite, I don't know what I planned with that, really. It was way too much preparation for what it was.
I want to pause here real quick, Paul, because that's super interesting. What was your template for that, right? Had you only played D&D up to that point and you were just kind of riffing off of that, or had other games come across your table that helped influence this first creation? Because that's an involved first creation.
It was definitely, so it's the first thing I have to admit, right? D&D, me and D&D, 3 sessions in my entire gaming career. That first one we played out Great Redbox was the only time we played D&D. I did play AD&D. I genuinely don't remember how many sessions. It wasn't many. It's a complicated game. And then the last time I played D&D was when 5e came out, and I think I ran a session at a convention. So it's like 3 sessions. So
sure,
D&D had very little influence. So we played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in its first incarnation, Middle-earth role-playing game. We played Traveller, nice. Star Trek when it was FASA who were doing it. Call of Cthulhu would have been probably second edition when Games Workshop did a boxed edition because they licensed things, which is probably where the D&D had come from as well. And then niche stuff. So like there was a game called Laserburn, which is actually a war game. It was written by one of the people who would go on to help develop war games for Games Workshop. But it had a supplement which allowed you to play role-playing games in the Laserburn universe. And it had like marine-type characters in it. It had rebels and the Red Redemption or something, which was like this organization that was anyway, so there were lots of kind of influences that fed in.
Gotcha.
And I think as I put the game together, there were probably elements of all of those that fed into it. And I have to say, in that respect, one of the facets of my creative process is definitely like being a sponge to external influences, and I will kind of reach a critical mass having absorbed things, and it will just flow out into something which is a mess of various ideas. So as I said, like the Play by Mail game, Darklands, the first one I did, I said had a huge skill list. And now I'm trying to think what game might have influenced that. And possibly that might have been like Star Trek or Call of Cthulhu, because they had really big skill lists, whereas things like D&D and so forth were still at that end where it was very simplistic in terms of the skills. But for the next 10 years, I ran various play-by-mail games. The earliest ones, typewritten rule books, handwritten turns. So people would say what their character needed to do. I would send like an A4 sheet of handwritten response, maybe more than that. I would actually use carbon paper to take a copy for my records. Later, I upgraded, and upgrade is a very loose word, to an Amstrad PCW, which ran on 3-inch discs. 3-inch. I mean, they couldn't even go for the already standardized whatever three and a half. No, Amstrad had to go with a 3-inch disc. But that was like at university, so I'd already been running games for, and I ran games as well as taking a degree in history and political studies, which might explain why I only got an average grade.
So, Paul, first off, you have to discover that play-by-post exists, right? And it sounds like in lieu of just playing, you decided I'm going to create a game and I'm going to run a play-by-post. I guess my first question is where did you come across play-by-post? And then after that, how did you find players? So
I think both sources would have been White Dwarf during its heyday. That's golden first 100 issues, when it was it was the UK's really only gaming magazine other than imports of things like Dragon, and they used to have a classified section at the back, and so there was a paid classified section for those people who were seeking monetary reward of some kind. People used to paint miniatures for other people and they'd send them in the post. It was adverts like that. Send me your miniature and I'll send it back painted. And so to avoid the initial cost of paying for a paid classified, the very first version of Darklands was self-addressed envelope. So you send me an envelope with a stamp on it and I'll send you a response. It began to become something which had a very small monetary value. But even at the time, I think my hourly rate, I mean, I know how much role-playing writers get paid now for freelance work, so it's probably not much different to what it was comparable then. but it really wasn't much considering the time that I was putting into it, I think. I had seen adverts. There were not only in the classified section, but they had them in the main magazine. So the ones that come to mind are things like Krasimov's World, It's a Crime, and some of those were computerized. So It's a Crime, for example, was a mob game where you controlled a small gang and you tried to grow its turf and do stuff, and it was all churned out by a computer. But there were definitely ones which were more my end of handwritten. It was like a pen pal. You were a pen pal with a dozen people, and you were creating a story. And so I advertised. I think I'd played a couple, maybe like It's a Crime and things like that. But I think I can't genuinely recall what they were called, despite the fact I've probably got them in a box somewhere in the house. But yeah, I played some, and then I thought I can do this. I think.
Yeah.
So I tried it, and as I said, it went on for quite a long time. I was playing and running them, and actually by I think the early 90s, so when I was at later years of university, I actually even started reviewing play-by-mail games in a magazine called Role Player Independent, which ran for about 2 years. I have no recollection of whether they paid me anything. It was a newsstand magazine. It wasn't just
kidding.
at the time, again, it was a big era of zines, but this was a newsstand magazine which ran for between for about 3 years, I think, overall. And I wrote the play-by-mail column for most of that time.
So, Paul, there's different ways that we engage with this hobby, and I'm getting a sense of from you that you're one of the people that tends to run the games more than play the games. And it also sounds, because you did this with this play-by-mail, but I'd also, you hinted at it at university as well, where you end up being the coordinator, right? Like, this is the game. I'm going to teach other people how to play this game. I'm going to run these games. What is that part of you that could very easily just say, I'm just going to play these play-by-mails. These are great. And, I'm going to go find somebody who's running 5e and play an elf. But it seems like there's an instinct with you that you want a more creator-centric control of this. I'm not quite sure how to verbalize this. Is what I'm asking making sense?
Yeah, no, it's making sense. I am one of those life's great GMs. I mean, now I have friends who actually laugh when I suggest that I played somebody's game because they know I won't have enjoyed it.
Why? Why would you not enjoy it?
Well, it's not that. Okay, so yeah, I think so. What I mentioned before about things like Lego, wanting to take the Lego and almost ignore the instructions. So you've got the building blocks. So that is that interesting creating something yourself out by understanding how things go together, creating the street instead of worrying about an individual car or something. But the slightly more complicated thing, and it's something that to be clear, I have not been diagnosed in any way, shape, or form, but I genuinely believe if I am not ADHD, then there's something of that in my makeup that means that I find even now it incredibly uncomfortable and unenjoyable, wrong word, but to sit down and play a game that I don't understand. So I don't like sitting down to play a board game or a role-playing game unless I've read the rules. And it's if I don't grasp the mechanics, I won't enjoy it. And so often it's dawned on me as I've got older and older that this is I've lived with this all that time, but haven't necessarily been able to understand the structure of it and the way my brain is worked around it. That yes, if I don't understand it, I won't enjoy it. So, which is a challenge to know in advance what games you're going to play at an event, so you can at least have a quick skim read of the rule book. Especially with some of the rule books that you see, hundreds of pages. So I've got to at least grasp the mechanics. Yeah. And there's nothing worse for me than sitting down with other people going, let's just play this board game or let's play this game. And I'm going, no, I won't enjoy it. Don't make me do that.
So Paul, I can sympathize with this, both as a person and I'll mention a friend of mine. And I get a sense that maybe we all fall like on a spectrum here of the degree in which this things. So I am very much like you, except I can sit down and be taught a game and play a game and have fun until something doesn't feel right. So I'll hear a rule or we'll be doing something. I'm like, yeah, this doesn't make sense to me. I feel like we're missing something. And like, if that starts to click where I feel like maybe we missed a rule or maybe I'm not getting all the information, then everything falls apart for me. And I'm like, somebody give me the goddamn rule book because something's off here, right?
Yeah.
But I've got another good friend of mine, a local here who I play a lot of games with, And I've learned this about him. He has a far more extreme version of this, and it sounds like he may be a little bit closer to you. And I've learned, like, because I tend to be the central hub, and I will teach new games and things like that. I've learned with Kevin, I need to have the rule book ready. I need to give him the rule book when we start playing, and he's incredibly intelligent, so he'll take in everything I'm teaching, and he'll also co-learn at the same time with the book in front of him. And, you know, if we're doing some mechanic or something, he needs to go to that page and make sure he reads along with the teach and stuff like that. And if that's not happening, he falls apart and he ends up not having a whole lot of fun. So it's a very interesting the way our brains are wired.
Yeah. And it is, I think it's been an experience to actually begin to piece that together, to realize that something that I did, here's my age coming into it, something I did 35, 40 years ago has been influenced by a state of consciousness, thinking, you know, whatever the process is, that I haven't really accounted for until now, to actually say, wow, no, actually, that's not just a random thing that I did. That was my brain working in a certain way. And a lot of, I think that's the same with what I'm saying about being a sponge as well. I have to, it connects into that. Reading the rule book, giving you comfort enough to play a game that you've never played before, is the same principle. It's absorbing enough information that you reach that point where, you know, during the game, you won't sit there and wait for the dissonance of thinking, that doesn't feel right. You'll get to the point and go, actually, the rule is, and you'll probably know the page before anyone else does, the rule here is to do this. But at the same time, that process can be twisted around to say, I understand the rules well enough that I think I can see either where it could be used for something else, or maybe oh, heaven forbid, I think this could be done better by house ruling it this way, because this element does this make sense to everybody at the table? And, you know, it's that. So I think that equally is where the side of, I could do this myself, couldn't I? Maybe. And then sitting down and spending long hours running games. As I said, it wasn't just role-playing games. It was like I created war games and stuff as well. I've never been a big war gamer, but I created like war games that ran for years. Wow. So yeah,
that's cool. As you are absorbing, right? So you're in the mode where you are reading books, consuming role-playing games that are out there, learning systems as part of it. And it sounds like you're a little bit like me too, where I find incredible joy in that. That's, for me, is its own hobby. Like buying a game and reading a game. Yeah,
I mean, no one's going to know what you can see behind me. And that's only like a sixth. It's like 10%, 15% of my collection. This whole wall along one side and the opposite side of this room are just full of games. And that doesn't include what's in the hallway and upstairs in a cupboard. So you and I are definitely aligned here, because this is called Third Floor Wars, because the house I bought has a finished third floor, which my wife, we agreed that I needed that because she doesn't want all my shit in her house. So she said, we're going to get either a refinished basement or a finished third floor, and all your shit's going to go up there so I don't have to look at it. So I literally, and you can't see it, but I literally have it at like 1,000 square feet, and it's all bookshelves and tables and board games and stuff. Nice. So I'm with you, man. I'm totally with you. It's so funny. So as you're absorbing all of this, right, what tends, because I'm sure a lot of it you throw out, right? Because I've read several games that I know, not only will I never play, but I don't know if I could really tell you about them, because they kind of went in and went out. And I'm like, I get what this is happening here, but it doesn't turn me on. Do you have a sense of what you do end up grabbing onto? So what is it that you can see in other games that you will absorb? First off, I do refer to this stuff as my research material. It's, the stuff I'm researching, so I need to buy a dozen more books. I will keep something because it maybe resonates. There might be a singular function of it which you see used several times. There are games at the same time that I keep because deep down, probably I'm just a hoarder as well, but not of the I can no longer move from this door to this door level of hoarding. But it's organized. But I've got like an almost complete collection of Middle Earth role playing game, which I would never run.
Yeah,
I'm not mad. God, because
so much,
but equally like Star Trek, faster Star Trek and stuff, the early stuff. I think I quite like revisiting them. There is a role playing event called Grog Meet in the UK, run by Chris Hart, Dirk the Dice, and that for me, for example, is an example of people coming together and playing games which have been in their cupboard for far too long and rediscovering them. And sometimes you actually find the game that you thought was crunchy horrible actually wasn't crunchy horrible. It might have just had an element like Star Trek, faster Star Trek. If you drop the action point system, which was just a horrible hangover from wargaming, it's just a really simple D100 game. It does it slightly weirdly in that it adds a modifier in a way that you wouldn't probably do with gaming now, and I can't probably describe it because I ran it and there were people looking at me saying, "You sure it works like that?" Yes, it does. It does. But that's the fascinating part of it. And it's understanding. Somebody spent a lot of time and effort in many cases coming up with structurally these games, how they worked, how they hang together, and I think it's quite interesting as research material to have that to look back on. And there will be games like that I have gone back to many times and sort of to look at it that way, to say what did this game do, what made it stand out. There are a few maybe that I will have picked up and got rid of even now, modern games as well as older games, but I think they need to have done something fairly significant for me to go, this, it doesn't gel. I just don't understand this at all. Because actually sometimes if I don't understand it, I might keep it until I do. I do understand it.
Sure.
I have run things like Fate and Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark and various games like that, which a lot of people probably reckon they run quite well. And I reckon they're wrong.
I reckon you're right.
There are also people who write games using the systems, and I don't think they get it either. And it's what you mentioned before. It's sitting playing a game, and then you get the dissonance of thinking, does it work? No. Is that rule? No. And I find that quite fascinating as well. So I will cling on to some of those games and run them, normally in a safe space of saying, I think this is how it runs. Just to I think the word is grok it, to hope that one day I will comfortably I understand Fate. I understand. I can sell it now. I've got it. And I think that's quite interesting as well. That appeals to my sort of mindset to get down into the nuts and bolts.
I could not agree more. I'll never forget, having really read a good number of PBTA games, having Apocalypse World, and really feeling like, okay, I get this. I understand this. And then I came across a YouTube video of Vincent running Apocalypse World. And funny enough, John Harper was one of the players. If you can go search for this on YouTube. And I'm like, I had no idea what I was doing. Now that I see what Vincent really was doing and how he was, what was happening when he ran the game, I realized that, not only did I misinterpret what Apocalypse World was, but I think I'm not the only one. I think there's a lot of people that make PBTA games that don't, and that's fine. You can riff off stuff and make it your own. This is not a condemnation, but it's truly not getting it. And I think the same is true of Forged in the Dark. With the same thing, watching John run Blades in the Dark is going to surprise a lot of people who run Blades in the Dark and how he runs it and how he frames it. So that's very, very true. So Paul, as you're going through this, because you and I are of similar age, and we hinted at it when we talk about PBTA and Blades, like things have changed from Traveler to Fate, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of innovation, a lot of changes happened. As you look at that journey over the last 3 decades, were there games along the way that blew your mind? Games that you picked up and started to gronk and it changed the way you thought the hobby functioned? Or was it always incremental?
That's a tough question.
Welcome to my shitty podcast.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether there was necessarily a game that has sort of, smacked me in the face and had that effect necessarily. I think I'm fascinated by the new innovations when they come along, but I'm not 100% sure that a game has caught me that hard and sort of pulled me up, and because I think I will always approach it. I mean, sticking with Powered by the Apocalypse, I'm fascinated by it. I don't think I'm yet 100% certain why.
Yeah.
Why do it this way? And sometimes I appreciate what the writers have done and how they have influenced the way we think about games. But at the same time, I sometimes wonder why. What is it achieving? So, not necessarily actually then Powered by the Apocalypse. Games will set out to do something, and you'll think, was that a problem we needed to fix? Is it doing what is it doing? So some of the games in that arena border on being board games, for example. There's so many components to it. And maybe is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Who's it? Right. But I mean, I don't know. I think it's always a sort of joy to find something new, but I don't think something has necessarily struck me that hard.
So let me reframe it, because I think I set a pretty damn high bar the way I framed that first question. What is something that you remember reading that got you excited? Where you really went, oh, that is interesting. That I need to spend some time with. That I need to explore some more. Do you remember that happening in your journey? Well,
this probably links into something that I have been responsible for as well. That was probably Black Hack in 2016. And the weird thing with it is that it wasn't necessarily the whole thing that struck me. It was the mechanics, the simplicity, the approach that was taken in the design of the game. As I've said, because I never played very much D&D. That was not the path I went down. So from an old school approach, I've probably always been on the outside of the old school because I never went there. I was never a pupil. And so, but there were elements in the way it was presented and the approach to it, the mechanics like the supply die that allowed you to not keep track of things, that when I was reading it, for some reason, the supply die, for example, hit me as, wow, that's a really neat mechanic. A way to track something which slowly winds down to nothing means you don't have to track the 40 arrows or whatever you happen to have stuffed in a quiver, but introduces the slight stress and tension of knowing that each time you fire an arrow, each conflict you get into, maybe next time there won't be any arrows left, and it becomes less of a bookkeeping exercise and actually adds to the unknown of the game. And that kind of led into, as I was reading it, I thought, wouldn't that be a really good way to handle like sanity or something in a Cthulhu game?
Right.
And so within 3 months of David Black releasing the Black Hack, I had written the Cthulhu hack, because that specific mechanic just hit me, and not only did I use it for the sanity part, but also for the investigative part.
Yep.
Because my reading of Lovecraft had always put across the notion that the hero was someone who was steadily whittled down as a person. They were pushed to breaking point, and that wasn't necessarily what had been seen in earlier versions of the game, which obviously has now had a different slant taken to it in terms of the impact on the mental state of the player character. I saw this as a way whereby the character could effectively break under the pressure of their revelation and realization that they were an insignificant sort of crumb on the plate of the restaurant of the whatever the universe, and that, so that kind of hit me, and that kind of got me. That's what set me off the trail to self-publishing, more or less. So that was quite a significant discovery.
I bet. And what a beautiful transition to the next segment. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. We're going to do that more with Paul on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about what we just talked about. We're going to talk about Cthulhu Hack. We'll be right back. This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month, because supporting content creators keeps the content coming, even if there is a link in the show's description. And there is. We don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. So, usually people that listen to the show a lot know that, now I go into, where was the seeds of the discovery and stuff. We've kind of covered that. We realized that Black Hack kind of like perpetuated and pushed you forward to start discovering this. But very quickly, for those that are not familiar with Cthulhu Hack, let me read the summary and then let's continue the conversation from before the break. Cthulhu Hack is a simple game of Lovecraftian nightmares, pitting ordinary people against the terrors of a dark universe. The system is fast and simple, with just two mechanics, saves and resources, to manage your ability to escape threats and to manage your dwindling facilities for investigation and sanity. So, Paul, you get Black Hack in front of you and this idea of the dwindling die as a way to track arrows, as you mentioned. Was it an immediate jump to Cthulhu? Had you been playing things like, COC and there was problems you were trying to fix? Because one of the things that I'm finding when I talk to creators, Paul, is that often their creation ends up that being a way for them solving a problem, which you've kind of hinted at as well. So I'm trying to get the connective tissue. Mechanically, I understand the connective tissue from Black Hack to Cthulhu Hack, but why Cthulhu? You could have done sci-fi. There's so many other, genres of RPGs, but you chose this one. So I'm trying to get a sense of how that car steered in that direction.
That's probably a really weird one as well for me to admit to. Is probably I am an individual who might start digging into something way earlier than is advisable. So a prime example, just nipping back in time, Middle-earth role-playing game. I ran that for a year and a half. I didn't read the book until about 25 years later. I mean, wow. Lord, I read the first book, as in the first half of Fellowship of the Ring. I might have even got into the second, but Lord of the Rings, I didn't read from cover to cover until I was like 40. And so I had some really weird adventures in Middle Earth, and just purely relied on what was in the box. And so with Lovecraft, I'm not sure how much Lovecraft I had necessarily. I don't think I'd read any Lovecraft beyond what was presented in the games which I had been playing. I had played, I said, second edition, which was effectively this box set that Games Workshop put out in the early mid 80s, and I had played. I think I played every edition after that. I think sixth is the only one I don't have any recollection of. But many people will actually say, well, it's just been an incremental change, of presentation rather than system, really. It's certainly been tinkered with. But I mean, Mason and Fricker probably went, more with seventh edition. They added various things like the push and the luck and so forth. But so I think I came at it with a fairly low level of appreciation of Lovecraft, which is also a complex issue anyway, because of Lovecraft's rather dubious beliefs. It meant that I had this kind of, even though it was 2016, I think I have already forgotten the actual. I don't think I wasn't searching to write another. Who needs another Cthulhu game? Are there not too many already? But for some reason, it was the mechanic. I think the mechanic just struck me, and there was like two wires meeting and a spark in between. And I can't account for why one of those wires was the sanity mechanic of a Cthulhu game, and the other was supply die because it was in front of me. But I saw it, and that it just struck me as being a way to do it. And I then keyed into that. And the cynics might say that the reason why you go with Lovecraftian games is because there's lots of public domain material you can just take for your own. To warn everyone who considers that, it's not, very little of it's public domain. There's so much stuff that came later on, Derleth and the everyone more modern. You need to be very careful. So otherwise there will be people after you with legal proceedings. But so for me, it was an opportunity to actually get the books off my shelf, or to buy new ones. Buy new ones was the best part of it, obviously, of collections of Lovecraft stories, and read them from scratch, and keep my creation purely within Lovecraft's sphere and nothing else. And by coming at it relatively fresh, to do it in a way that meant I could contain it and make Cthulhu Hack solely about what I began to understand as somebody who, as I said, history and politics as a degree, and I was interested in history and reading. I had lots of books as I've grown up, many of which I still have. I enjoy that sponge process of absorbing information, to the point where, I felt things like the first supplement for Cthulhu Hack was called the Haunter of the Dark, which is genuinely taking the Haunter of the Dark, which is in the second part of the book, annotating it to show elements within the story that represent food for you to use in your own creations. This bit here, what does that really mean? What's that referring to? Could this refer to, is this a hook for an adventure? Could you do this? And then the first part of the book is a kind of generalized approach to how you structure an investigation, as well as providing a sequel to the Haunter of the Dark as an example of using that structure to set out an adventure. But I did that by reading the Haunter of the Dark 5-6 times or whatever, and going through it until I kind of absorbed it. At the same time, making no claims that I'm anything of a Lovecraftian expert as a result of it, because after I'm finished, it tends to fade away until I, start researching again. So that's not my superpower. I haven't found that superpower yet.
I would venture to guess, Paul, that the vast majority of people who play Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, Trail of Cthulhu, all of these really great, cosmic horror games that lean on Lovecraft and those that followed him, were like you, never really read the source material. I've gotten in trouble for saying this, but he's not an easy read. I'm a big fan of his work, not a big fan of him. But I would not say that he's an easy read. So I understand how people bounce off of it. But you're curious. You're curious because you started that way, but you didn't finish that way, right? There was a moment where you said, all right, I need to absorb these books to really understand where this other stuff that I've been playing with for a while now came from. What was something that you discovered going back to his writings? What were aspects that you felt you didn't really know until you read his stories and some of his work?
I mean, I think some of it is he's obviously known for the colorful language and the endless adjectives that he can jam into a sentence to make it as complicated to read as possible. But at the same time, I think that's a really useful way of extracting ideas and atmosphere from his text, because he labors on, layering in more than he probably needs to in his descriptions. It's a very fruitful way of being able to extract, an atmosphere, as I said, of what the stories and the adventures in Lovecraft space are, what they're like, what they should feel like, how they can be presented, and I think because of the way he writes, there's room for interpretation, which is why, as with all books, I guess, but the color in there makes it very, I said, more of an opportunity to extract the essential salts from from his work and turn them into something more. And a lot of the time, I've actually, as a result of writing some of the things I have in Cthulhu Hack, I have had some heated discussions with people, because having read things fresh, actually what you're saying, many people will come at it, not necessarily have read a lot of Lovecraft. They will read a lot of Call of Cthulhu supplements or Trail of Cthulhu supplements, but they won't necessarily have read Lovecraft. So, for example, I had quite a discussion with Call of Cthulhu as such a dominant game running back to the 80s or the late 70s or whenever the very first edition came out. It is foremost in people's minds, and Cthulhu Hack has been translated to Spanish and French and Italian and notionally to Japanese. There is a player translation. But so I've interacted with other people who've then translated the game, and they've cast questions in my direction about what does this mean? Why did you put this? Whatever. Right. And I had a discussion with one of the translators, or at least one of the companies doing the translation, who insisted that the Haunter of the Dark, the entity, was Nyarlathotep. And I said it wasn't, because it doesn't say that in the story. If you read that, it's right near the end of the story, and it's kind of the visions that the author is experiencing as he becomes overwhelmed by the presence of the Haunter, and it refers to the Haunter having been witness to certain things. And the way it's written, I read it as it was witness to Nyarlathotep and one of his incarnations. It was not itself an incarnation of Nyarlathotep. I don't speak Italian. I'm willing to believe that they might have said he's a fool. Don't write that. Just change it. So I do
You can't check their work.
I put my life in my hands when it comes down to it to say, yes, you can do a version which I can't fact check. I'll trust you. But that I find that fascinating it's fascinating to actually read it for that reason, to find ideas and hooks and dig into the descriptive element, which, as I said, in the case of Lovecraft is overdone to the extent that it's more enjoyable to pick at it. And at the same time, as you said, some of the stories, though, you kind of can skip a few pages while he's being rampantly, racist or something, and just go, that wasn't a clever idea. But there is so much in there.
It's also interesting, and I wonder if you agree with this, that, and again, this is not a bad thing, but like Call of Cthulhu, so much of the scenarios and even some of the source books that have come out over the last, couple decades for that really had nothing to do with the Lovecraftian horror. It's become a bit of just a horror game. And there's been elements added that are definitely fall in the genre of horror, but you could argue this is not Lovecraftian horror. And again, not a bad thing. And one of the things that I noticed about Cthulhu Hack is this is going to sound judgmental. It's purity. It is about Lovecraftian horror. That is what this game is about. And I think that made it very, very unique. I want to go back into the development of it a little bit if we can, Paul. So you find this mechanic. You're like, this is super interesting. You connect those two wires. Now we're going to port this over and put it in this Lovecraftian genre. What condition was the game in the first time you ran it for somebody else? What did the game look like?
So with Black Hack, David Black had made the text available almost as a source reference document. And so I had taken that and written every section from scratch. So I'd read a section and write it as I wanted it for Cthulhu Hack. So the first time I ran it, it was a complete document. And actually even now, often, I very rarely take a game to the table that doesn't have some kind of rule book. I occasionally, and we'll get onto it later, maybe like Dee Sanction was the absolute opposite. I took that to the table with almost fully formed adventures, but no clue what the mechanics were going to be like. But with Cthulhu Hack, I went to the table. It was a local, I think the first time I ran it was a local club, a gaming shop in Sheffield called Patriot Games. And they were having like a birthday celebration where they were running games on both floors of the store. And I sat down with some people, and I admit it, I ran the haunted house, the first Call of Cthulhu adventure, the one that with the house that needs to be checked out because the landlord can't get rid of it, hand it on because something's up. And I ran that adventure. Rather than coming up with something myself, because I just wanted to, it was kind of a test of, can I take an adventure from another system and run it almost on the fly with the rule set that I've come up with? If I can, it's probably got legs to it, and I can go with it. So I think that was after about 2 months in, before I think I started writing it in like February or March 2016. I probably tested it in like April, and I published it in May. But that was as a PDF, and I then actually was in June. The UK Games Expo is the biggest gaming event in the UK. I actually had Lulu'd 50 copies, print on demand copies, to take to the event to sell. So that's how confident I was that this game seems to work. At the same time, though, the game definitely had challenges in the decisions I had made about the system. So you referenced there that it has two mechanics: saves and resources. So the saves look like the D&D characteristics of strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. They are only used if you are threatened. They are never used to do a skill roll. And I have watched people run it who didn't grasp that, which is why over time the book changed. I would tweak it. There was a 1.5 edition. There's now the 2nd edition, because over time I had to reinforce that this was not the game you thought it was. So saves are only used when you are threatened, not necessarily combat. If somebody's going to hypnotize you, somebody's laid a trap for you, that threat, you are literally trying to save yourself. Now, saving yourself might mean hitting somebody in combat, but you fight with somebody to save your life. You don't, generally speaking. So the idea is that you save when you are threatened. Everything else is handled by the resources. So you have smokes and flashlights, which are your social and physical investigative skills. And you have sanity, which is your way of handling the understanding of the cosmic scale of the horror and the fact that we are such small specks in it. And the notion was that when you are in a position to gather new information, often having stated that you're seeking it, I am going to the library to find out what this piece of script is, what language it's in. I would say, it's ancient Sumerian and it says this, and tell you what it says. And then you roll for your resource. So exactly like the black hack, you don't roll the resource until you have used it, which is another thing that people go, sorry? why am I rolling after? So you've told me what, right? But the point of the game is, it's these roles, these resources are a representative of your individual personal resources, literally of your character and personality and your ability to withstand the constant pressure of the universe closing in around you. And so the notion is you make the roll not to see if you discover something, but actually to see if your discovery reveals something about yourself. So when you roll the dice, you don't want to get a 1 or 2. If you roll a 1 or 2, you have a break where you have a revelation. And that might well be, yes, you recognize the ancient Sumerian. You know it's Sumerian. You know what it means. The reason you know it, because you rolled a 1 or 2, is actually your great uncle had a secret part in his library, which you recall going into when you were just a small child, and you found something in there that now you've come into this situation. You've remembered this book. There's this big book on the shelf. You can't remember what name was on it. It probably began with N, Neck or something, but it was on your great uncle. But the whole point is that each time you fail the roll, which you're breaking as an individual. So each 1 or 2 takes steps down the die, like the supply die from Black Hack, but it's you that's becoming broken and smaller. So when it gets to nothing, if it's the smokes becomes nothing, you no longer have the capacity to deal with people, because you really don't have the capacity to even deal with yourself because of what's struck you. And the physical stuff is you can't make sense of anything anymore. Why should it make sense? Because all these things that you've discovered. So I kind of flipped everything on its head, which means that yes, I have sat and watched or even played. The really brave people let me play. And I never judge people on it because that would be wrong of me. Everyone plays games they want the way they want to play them, and if it works, that's fine. But it just means I make a mental note that I need to reinforce it next time I write, a tweak or an addition that shifts it along and makes it very clear that that's the notion of the game.
that gets to a question a thing I wanted to talk about, which is, why a second edition, right? There's a difference between doing a revision or a clarification stuff, but you kickstarted an entire second edition for this. Was the main driver saying I can present this better to put forth what I think is the better way to play this, or the better way to present this? What led you to say this is a second edition? Does that make sense?
So yeah, so one thing is that I spent 5 years publishing books out of my own pocket. So I would do a print run and I was doing print runs. Except right at the beginning, in that first sort of 6 months after I published, I was using things like Lulu or Drive-Thru. I then started printing, doing short print runs. So I'd do 100 or 200 or 300 books, because that meant I could control what the book looked like, the paper stock. I could make sure it printed right every single time, because I was the last person seeing it before it got sent to the person. Not to say I don't trust print on demand companies, but there are definitely notes and reviews in sections that point out to the quality, and I knew that I didn't want that. That probably then ties back into the my need to control and understand what's going on. But it meant that, for the first 5 years, I was paying for everything out of pocket. So the very first editions, and I have always done as much work on it as I can do. So the very first editions, I did everything. When it got to version like 1.5, I found a Polish artist through DeviantArt who I really liked his style. And he did me some chapter headers sort of things. But I was still doing everything else myself, as rubbish as my layout and everything else might have been, and how minimal the editing, it was me. By the time I did like the 7th or 8th supplement, I think it was Mother's Love, which is a collection of Shub-Niggurath adventures, I did nothing on that except for the backroom stuff. So I had 4 people writing adventures. I had a bunch of commissioned art. I did the layout and the editing and brought it together, but it wasn't me. That was very costly for me as an indie publisher, compared to what I'd been doing before, where I don't pay myself. I am slave labor every time. So I am doing everything for nothing essentially, and then hoping that I can sell the print run and to make back the money it's taken me to do it. So after 5 years, I'd certainly been spending money on crowdfunding. And I realized, is this the time to work out how crowdfunding could make this look better and let me do slightly more, make a nice shiny book with lots of color art in it and double the page count, and because I can set the price level and people will either back it or they won't, rather than, I am a terse writer. Generally, I will write short, thankfully, for my pocket as somebody who was paying for everything at the beginning. So I was always writing really quite short material, 20-page supplements or 30-page adventures or whatever it might be. But yes, so second edition in part was an opportunity to do more, to double the size of the rulebook. It was also an opportunity to add, as a result, more examples, more white space. White space costs money. But that sense of not having everything just sort of flowed into as few pages as possible. And yes, to that point, it was an opportunity just to make it bigger and better and brighter. Although bizarrely enough, I got a tiny bit of criticism from people for having colorful headers on the pages, like that wasn't Lovecraftian. This looks very bright. Why is this page so bright?
You also can read my book and not lose sanity, so let's not talk about authenticity here, right?
So that was my first experience, my worst experience with crowdfunding as well, because I then had a complete.
Why?
I think I had a bit of a. I think my whole mental state kind of broke down. I began to doubt myself. I didn't know whether I was going to be able to pull everything together. I had everything written, and that I wasn't lying in the Kickstarter. It's all written. It genuinely was. It's written. I've been publishing it for 5 years, but when it came to turning it into the new edition, I just the doubts, the demons sort of crept in, and I just and the trouble is that Kickstarter has a little mechanism that says, "Would you like to prod the creator to ask for an update?" And that's like being poked with a very sharp stick when you're not in a good place.
It's a real easy button for us to push. I'll tell you that, and a lot different to receive it, I'm sure.
But it came out. So it came out 9 months after I'd attended. It wasn't. I've got Kickstarters that still haven't delivered after years. So, but still, it doesn't matter. The people with their finger on the button saying, "Give me an update. Where's my stuff?" Don't seem to see it's only been 9 months. It's not been 5 years or whatever it is. And so it did come out, and I did fall foul ever so slightly again because of the way it had come out. It had taken longer than expected. I had a bigger page count than I expected. I didn't have as much art as I wanted, so I actually had some AI art in it when it was published, which I have replaced at my own expense through finding another artist. But that was a process that took me another 6-9 months after I published it, and I could not have sat through another day of not having it in the backer's hands because of the few people who found what felt like great pleasure in twisting the knife and asking why I hadn't sent it out yet. So to all the Kickstarters out there who do that, don't. Really, you're not helping anyone. I get it; it's very frustrating, and some people do push too far. They take too long, but many creators are just doing their best. I have a day job. I have had a day job since I left university in the 90s, and this has always been, it's something I've done on the side. So,
well, there's companies that treat Kickstarter as a pre-order. And then there are backers that also treat it like a pre-order. I am a prolific backer. It's embarrassing how many projects I back, but I count myself as somebody who does it from the spirit of what I think Kickstarter is, which is finding somebody who's doing something on their own. And don't get me wrong, I back the big stuff too, but yes, am I disappointed? Do I have 15, 20 Kickstarters that have never fulfilled? Yes, I do. And does that disappoint me? Does that frustrate me? Yes. But I also signed up for it, right? And I knew that when I hit back, that it's possible that I will not only not get it on November 2025, I may never get it. But it's important for me to do this because I want to support creators, and it's a way for me to do that and for me to get shiny things. But it's funny. I've talked to so many people, Paul, that have shared a similar story to yours, which is it's not a lack of empathy to the backers, but the reality is that you jumping up and down, holding your breath and posting 15 comments every day and pressing that, ask for an update button, that's not getting stuff done faster. If anything, it might be gumming up the works.
Yeah.
So guys, we're going to take another break, and we're going to talk about a game that I am not as familiar with, but I'm anxious to talk about. We're going to talk about the Dee Sanction. Are you enjoying our long-form interviews with creatives on this podcast? Maybe you're craving deeper discussions about our guests or some of the RPG plays on our Twitch and YouTube channel. Well, I've got an opportunity for you. You see, Third Floor Wars now has a Patreon-only Discord server. You can join a vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts diving deep into every episode of our RPG plays and podcast, connect with fans, engage in spirited discussions, and unlock the behind-the-scenes insights.
For just $1 a month, access a world of tabletop gaming goodness. Connect with passionate gamers who share your love for the Tabletop Podcast and everything produced on the third floor. As a Patreon supporter, you also enjoy ad-free episodes of this podcast. You can immerse yourselves in captivating stories and fascinating interviews without interruptions, taking your listening experience to a whole new level. By joining the Third Floor Wars Patreon community, you not only gain exclusive access to the Patreon-only Discord server, but you also support the growth of my podcast and channels. Your contributions enable me to continue creating high-quality content that entertains, educates, and upskills tabletop enthusiasts like yourself. Maybe don't wait. Join the Third Floor Wars Patreon today and unlock a world of camaraderie, discussions, and knowledge. Visit patreon.com/Third Floor Wars or check the link in the show notes and come join our community. The Third Floor Wars Patreon-only Discord server awaits you. I and the other patrons can't wait to welcome you with open arms and a fistful of dice.
So it's very common for me, Paul, when I find guests that they have one piece of their work that says, I need to talk to this person. And for you, it was Cthulhu Hack. When I read that, you went on my, what I jokingly call my hit list, which is, people that at some point I need to try to book for the show. And you and I think we're two ships passing in the night. We had similar overlays. I ended up connecting. I think it was on Twitter. I can't remember. I was like, oh my God, like Paul's on my list. I got to get Paul on. But I know that it wasn't the only thing you'd made. It's just what I was familiar with. And I started to do some digging and saw this Dee Sanction, which evolved to something else. And I found this game very, very fascinating. And it is now on my list of things that I need to absorb the same way you absorb and do your research with other games. But let's quickly talk about what the Dee Sanction is. The Dee Sanction is an award-winning tabletop role-playing game about serving queen and country in the late Tudor period. As magic and creatures of the supernatural increased throughout the land, Queen Elizabeth decreed that the punishment for acts of magic was severe. In 1564, the Queen was convinced to pass an amendment to the Act of the Dee Sanction, permitting the practice of magic to defend the realm. You are an agent of Dee, not out of choice, but out of some twisted sense of self-preservation. Somewhere between conscription and penance, you work for Walsingham and Dee to make amends, with a faint hope that you can use your talents to earn your pardon and absolution. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. If only you can outrun the shadows of your past and the horrors of the present. Phenomenal pitch, by the way. It's a copy and paste right out of right from the page. Where is the acorn for this? Where does this, what would become the Dee Sanction, where does that start to come from? And you've hinted that it wasn't the mechanics.
No. So this is more justification for my reference material behind me. So this goes back. So the true acorn would be the system Maelstrom, which you mentioned at the beginning. So back in the 80s, a young man called Alexander Scott, at the age of 17, had his game published by Puffin, I think it was at the time. It was at the time when Fight and Fantasy books were at their height. Ian Livingston and Steve Jackson had, as well as doing Games Workshop, started doing these solo game books, these choose your own adventure type game books. And so clearly somebody decided we should do more of these. And they did this. It was a game called Maelstrom. It was a role-playing game in a paperback book, a trade paperback type book. And it was about being an adventurer during the reign of Queen Elizabeth in the late 1500s. And I picked it up at the time and I read it because I think I fell in love with history in general because I had some really good history teachers. The first one being this grumpy Australian man called Mr. Bailey, who was very strict, but somehow he must have instilled something at me that made me want to dive into history more and more. And so I carried that through my school and into university, where I studied history, and I gathered books and books and books. And that. So there I have my research material. I have a history course where I began it had quite a wide set of modules, but every opportunity I got to choose a module, I would narrow it down to earlier. I hated modern history. I didn't want to do politics. As fascinating, absolutely. I've read books about the wars and the 20th century and whatever, but what was interesting for me was the earlier history. And so for some reason that slowly narrowed and narrowed until it got to the Elizabethan period. And so I had all these books, and I was reading, I think I was just reading about, so during that period of time, there was a heavy, and it isn't particular at that time, but it is notable, there was a heavy patronage. People would come to the Queen's Court claiming to know something and seeking some, gold to basically pursue their experiments or whatever, many of whom were things like alchemists who claimed they could turn base metals into gold and whatnot. And one of those amongst them was Dr. John Dee, who had actually been a friend of Queen Elizabeth since she was a lot younger, before she came to the throne. And according to the books, some books, he cast the astrological chart that, sort of suggested this, her fortunes would change, blah, blah, blah. But reading through it, I saw this at the time. There were laws which stood for a long time. I mean, UK had witchcraft laws well into the modern era, okay, which probably weren't being invoked anymore. But at the time, in the 1560s, there was an amendment made to the Act against witchcraft, conjuration, and enchantment, which effectively changed it because Elizabeth had very little money because King Henry VIII had spent it all. So her key interest was that no one take money that was the rights of the crown. So she made adjustments that said no one shall use magic to take treasure or find or take treasure. But she also kind of upped the ante on the death sentence part of the, using magic was punishable by death. And during the Elizabethan period, possessions were far more important than people. You could steal some bacon and get a punishment which was worse than if you had killed somebody. If you'd killed the servant carrying the bacon and then taken the bacon, the worst part of that would be the charge for the theft of the bacon. But anyway, that particular act just struck me, and as I was reading it, I thought, okay, if I take that thought, this act, what if? And it was a what if scenario. What if instead of, because there was this interest in treasure and possessions, why wouldn't she turn it around? Why couldn't she keep the people who are doing this and use them productively? And so I got the notion, and it is just that single small change, that the year after the act was passed, John Dee, her advisor, an alchemist and astrologer, says to her, why are we killing these people? Probably out of self-interest, because if he got on the wrong side of her, he would end up being, he could easily have been executed for tinkering with magic himself, because he spent most of his life trying to communicate with angels by trying various rituals to learn Enochian, which was his believed was the language of angels, and he hoped by learning the language he could speak to them and gather more understanding. So what if he convinced her that these people were worth saving and make them work? So the notion of the game is just that. And that's obviously far longer than the pitch you've just read out, but that was the basis of it. What if, what if the year after, Dee convinced her to make this change, which is called the Dee Sanction. It's an opportunity within the rule of law that somebody who's going to be executed can be given a stay of execution if they agree to serve the crown. And at the same time as all this stuff to do, the period of time is fascinating because it's on the cusp between science and magic and religion.
Yeah.
The Protestant faith is battling against the Catholic faith. The Anglican Church is growing in power in England because King Henry's wanted his divorce and he got excommunicated, and Elizabeth gets excommunicated. And science is definitely coming in, but magic is still there. People are still being treated for humors when they have a medical complaint. And, at the same time, there's this interest in navigation, and there's all sorts of things going on. Fascinating period, and at the same time, because there's so much political movement, you've got the King of Spain, Philip, is constantly fighting against pretty much everyone else. Emperor Rudolph is there. He's a fascinating character who has a menagerie of clockwork things in his possession, which he keeps. He gathers treasures and has this fascination with the sort of, definitely within the game, it becomes a fascination more with the unknown, and he's the sort of person who'd have a copy of the Necronomicon and probably will have stolen it from John Dee after he translated it. And so it just felt like a very rich period. And if Netflix or Amazon want to reach out to me about the rights, no. Anyway,
they're not spoken for yet.
They're not spoken for yet. I'm up to negotiations. So if I, having got to that point, I thought, this is really, I want to play this game. So why don't I write
turn
it?
you on. Yeah.
And so, as I said to you earlier, I then came up with a whole bunch of ideas for adventures, and started. It's the one and only time I think I've spent a long time tinkering with system, because it just wouldn't settle. I had the concept, I had the idea, I had adventures, but it took 7 years of tinkering to come up with. And in a way, so it started before Cthulhu Hack got written. It was 2014 when I started running sort of test adventures. And after I'd written Cthulhu Hack and had a bunch of those books under my sort of wing, I then had a notion of using the resource. Again, there was the supply die, which had become my resource, now became another way of approaching something. And so I had the idea. These were people who were reasonably capable and could get the job done if you gave them the right job to do, sort of thing. If they had a skill in something, they had a fair chance of achieving it. So what do you do? 50-50 maybe? So that's a D4. So if we keep the 1 and 2 from Cthulhu Hack as a kind of fail state, right, and then a 3 and 4 on a D4, that's a 50-50 chance. If we give them a D6, that's a 33-66. Sort of, and so I got the notion, use the resource as your characteristics instead of. And that took a while. That didn't hit me until maybe 2018, 19, when I started doing that. Beforehand, characters had been kind of defined by their skills. I kind of give them everyone's got 3 skills, and I had counters and cards. I just couldn't settle on anything. But then by the time after I'd run the Cthulhu Hack and that had worked as a crowdfunding, that felt like the opportunity to say, okay, now Dee Sanction can have its chance. Not only can I get crowdfunding to support the creation of the book, this is going to seem really bad. This is my actual chance to finally codify it as a coherent system by kind of forcing it. I'm going to run this date. I need to be ready for that date, because it felt really. I was disappointed in myself that it had taken like 7 years, and I'd run so many adventures. So like some of the adventures I've released since, like the Gong Scorer's Baby, were playtest scenarios, which I've now became part of the Dee Sanction. But yes, so I got there in the end, and I did write. I'd kind of written the background as a separate piece, and I wrote the core system as a separate component as well. So I could sort of put them together.
So you mentioned, Paul, that obviously the assignment of die sizes as your stats was a big breakthrough. Were there other breakthroughs? Were there other things that you were struggling with that took a little bit of time to sand the corners on? Or was that the big thing? Was that the big breakthrough in the game?
I think that was the key breakthrough.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I've read other systems since, like Cortex, which use different die sizes, and Cam has backed my campaign, has backed my games. I definitely didn't steal the Cortex system in any way, shape, or form. I haven't read Cortex system till like a couple of years ago. Because I play tested, I had lots of opportunities to sit down with people and get feedback. I quite enjoyed the fact that I had that opportunity to tinker around. What became apparent early on, I did quite like using cards, which had like an occupation on it and 3 skills, and you would choose a skill or have all the skills on the card right at the beginning. But as I went on, I realized I was coming up with like a life path character generation, and that has survived to the current version. So you have a character that's made out of their previous, with Dee Sanction, it's their previous occupation, it's the organization that they fell in with that influenced their progress into magic, and it is the occult book that they read that really tipped them over the edge and got them convicted. And by choosing those 3 things, you get 8 skills. And from those 8 skills, you can choose any 3 to start your character. But then as the game goes on, as your character develops, you can choose from those other 8 skills to continue its development. And that originally was in cards, but now it's a table. Although bizarrely enough, one thing that did survive is that the Dee Sanction is written to work with a pack of playing cards as well as dice if you don't have polyhedral sets, because it uses everything from a D4 to a D12, and the way I've written it allows you to use a pack of cards if you feel inclined to, which so it was that survived from that early process of me probably taking a playing card and pasting something on the other side of it. That playing card survived the process. But the other thing I wanted to do is keep combat simple. So everybody only has 3 hits. But the idea is that was probably me simplifying things. I literally looked at other systems and thought, when you get hit by an average weapon on, generally speaking, how long does it take you to fall over unconscious? 3. Yeah. So everybody gets 3 hits.
You can hit me with a bat 3 times and I'm going
down. And so that wasn't necessarily a breakthrough, but that was a nice simplification that's been carried forward as well. You can increase the hits, but everyone starts on 3 hits, because broadly speaking, you can get hit 3 times. By some of the bigger creatures can hit you for 3, so it's not going to save you at that point. But there comes the lesson. Don't fight demons or dragons, because you deserve it if you do. And then I think that was it. I mean, really, there were other things I tinkered around with. Was the notion of codifying or adding a mechanical aspect to the investigation part of it, the espionage part of it, which is called tradecraft. It's the part that I get taunted about the most, or at least asked questions about.
Why?
People either don't like it and taunt me for the fact that I've included something they don't like, or they ask me why I did it or how it works. And that tradecraft actually is something you choose at the start of each session, relates to different aspects of society, like your connection into places of power, or your ability to access unusual pieces of equipment. And you choose it at the start, and it allows you to add an extra skill during the game. So if you have chosen places of power, access, it's called, I think, in the game. I think that doesn't sound confident for the person who wrote it. You choose it, and you can.
This game, it's a good
one. You can choose it to influence your skills, so to fill a gap that no one has quite covered in the game. But you also choose it so that when you find the big bad, of the session, whether that's a creature or a political enemy or something else. The idea is that each of them will have a number of kind of defenses that you need to break through. It was almost the end of level boss that you get in console games, which you have multiple stages on. The first stage ends and it blows off the armor or something. You have to fight it again, or extra tentacles appear or whatever. Yeah. So the idea was, how do games do that now? Unless you don't get it, because people will go off after the dragon and they'll kill the dragon or whatever. Yeah. The dragon, you don't have to work out. It's kind of blended into the story that you've worked out where it is and where its weak point is and what you need to actually strike through that weak point. So I wanted to turn that into a part of the game. And that was the tradecraft, that you could actually stretch a villain over multiple adventures because you could not defeat it in the first adventure. You could get rid of one of the aspects of its defenses, but it would carry on with more. It was a bit of an experiment. It's almost worked. I'm sticking with it.
Oh, good. So one of the things that I find fascinating, Paul, as I talk to people that make games, is that I keep hearing a very similar story, which is, I was struggling with this, I was working on this, I was working on like this, and then it all came together. There was a moment where everything clicked. And when I hear these stories, sometimes it is adding a mechanic, removing a mechanic. Sometimes it's a play test where they finally realize, okay, now we're cooking. Now this is working. Did that happen with this game? Was there, this game has a long development period. Do you remember a time where you finally said to yourself, it's ready, it works? Yeah,
well, when the Kickstarter launched, that was, with this one, it was generally, it was setting myself a deadline, which probably was, maybe that was the weakness in the playtest process, because I didn't have a finite date. You know how it is. You can make any task go on for as long as you need it to if you don't have a deadline. So I think that was the challenge with this one. And as I said, I had run the game multiple times. I took it to one convention in Sheffield, and I ran the session without rules because I turned up with some rules, and I just felt I handed out stuff at the beginning. We ran the whole session without rolling a single dice because the adventures worked. Wow. It's just a system that, I knew what needed, the structure of the adventures I had, it was there, but the system didn't. But putting the deadline in helped. And as I said, I created a rule set as a result of it. And since then, as if to push even further, in 2023, I launched a crowdfunding for Sanction, which is the rule system by itself, because I also then found, after I released the Dee Sanction, so I did the Dee Sanction in 2020 for release in 2021, and I then did part of that was stretch goals, was adventures, but once the game was out, on social media I noticed that people were they'd played Dee Sanction and they were using the system to run other games. So they were using it for like a comic, they were doing it for, like, if you're familiar with things like Judge Dredd and Rogue Trooper from 2000 AD, science fiction games, general sort of investigation games. There were all sorts of things cropping up, and I was seeing people were using the system for other things. And I thought, okay, does that mean that the system itself, given the fact I created it so late, could I just port it back out and use it as the basis for other ideas I have that I could then use the rule system that I've got? So I have my own. The challenge with Cthulhu Hack is I was using somebody else's. David Black was very nice to provide this, SRD that you could work from, but I didn't have my own in-house system, and a lot of indie companies probably don't. They're creating stuff and or they're using other people's sort of structure to create this stuff. So I did Sanction, and I've done after doing that in 2023, 2024, I published it, and I've done a science fiction, a fantasy game, a Victorian ghost hunting game, a modern day spies who are absolutely rubbish, slight rip off of Slow Horses type game,
Nice.
all using the sanction system, and they work great. The other day I was roaming around Twitter, and I saw this banner for the espionage games called The Agency. I saw a banner with little images underneath of players, and it's all in Japanese. And I'm thinking, there's people in Japan playing my game.
Oh, so cool.
As a creator, that moment is a weird one to describe. Realizing that what you've done. Yeah, we talk about those crowdfundings where you back somebody because you believe in their creative process, but so many of those do end up on the shelf. You might read them, some of them you play, but to actually see that somebody has not only backed it, but is actually spreading the word by playing it with other players, that's a sort of incredible fuzzy warm feeling type moment to realize that Sanction as a generic system had legs as well.
That's got to be incredibly cool. So guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, I'm going to stop talking to Paul about what he makes. We're going to start talking to Paul about what he consumes. We're going to find out what he's been grooving on. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode.
So, Paul, this last segment has become a favorite of mine, and I found out a favorite of the audience too, which is really taking a step back and instead of talking about what you make, who you are, and how you make, what are things that turn you on? In the same way that you hope that games that you're making are being played in Japan and people are just loving it and enjoying it, I'm also finding it interesting to find out what you enjoy and love. So, has there been anything recently that's gotten its hooks into you? A game, a video game, prestige TV, a movie, is there or books or anything? What lately have you consumed and said, "Whoa, wow, this is really good, and I need more of it in my veins"?
Now, firstly, I have to say it's very hard when you're in a creative position not to link all your consumption with creating more stuff. so I mean, a lot of what I consume is for that purpose. So, while I'm finishing Sanction stuff, I'm hoping to do another Dee Sanction crowdfunding later in the year. So I need to be consuming Elizabethan things. I have had other games in mind. So I'm trying to come up with, like everyone else is, I'm trying to come up with a Morkborg sort of fork called Corkboard, which is basically Nordic noir investigation / police drama using the Morkborg system, which means I have a small stack of sort of Scandinavian whatever detective novels from like the 60s and 70s, which is so I'm doing a lot of that. So it's very hard to divorce myself from that kind of content. But otherwise, I do, as I said, I have a 9-to-5. I then fit the writing in after that. So I then tend to just zone out in front of, the TV, or I will, and then finally end the evening trying to read as many pages in a book before I pass out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard to divide myself from the content, so to speak.
Let's talk about this research then. What is, as you have been consuming all of this stuff to get yourself ready and as pre-work, is there anything that you've come across that ended up being more enjoyable than just, slogging through and learning? Is there something that really caught fire with you?
I mentioned it, right? Slow Horses on
what a show
on Apple Plus is fantastic, and if it's worth the subscription alone, kind of, sort of, depending on the fact Apple seems to be putting it up. But they do have a lot of very good stuff, and Slow Horses, the performances in that, Gary Oldman and as Lamb, I have now read all the books, so I am already way ahead of the TV series and looking forward to each one of them. But as a result of which, sort of having read those, I am now I have started tinkering around. I had gone into other espionage and police related stuff, which may then have led to that corkboard idea. But also, like Rivers of London, I read a lot of as well. I read a few of those before I had the fortune of pitching an idea to Lynn Hardy at Chaosium, and I think maybe I have an adventure being published for that soon, so I am continuing to read, although Ben Aronovich has made it really hard by having novellas and novels and graphic novels and all sorts of little bits and pieces. So it's that's almost like a treasure hunt to get all the bits and pieces that he's produced for that. So I find that kind of, that's been fascinating digging into as well. But I am also a rabbit hole type researcher anyway. Once I read a page on Wikipedia, I will click a link and then click another link, and suddenly an hour or two of the evening has passed by, and I've made some notes in Notepad, maybe 2 sentences at the end of all that, but it will be worthwhile in the end. But
sure.
I enjoy doing that.
So let's go back to Slow Horses just real quick then. You mentioned the performances being significant. What else is it about that show that has really connected for you?
I think if there's one commonality about the stuff that I've done for Dee Sanction onwards, it would be that the game is about failed people making something of their lives.
Right.
Maybe it's a mirror to myself. No, it's probably not a mirror to me, but people who have perhaps had to push a bit harder, struggle a little bit with the fact that, yes, everything didn't go their way, hasn't gone their way, but they are nevertheless making something of what they have. And Dee Sanction and Sanction both have that as their core element, so it does sing with me. As well as I don't fart as much as Lamb, but there's I don't drink as much as him, thankfully, as well. I haven't actually drunk alcohol in more than 10 years. So Lamb is in no way a sign of good health. To be clear, you should do absolutely the opposite of what he does. Yes. So it's fascinating as a series. It's a joy to watch. And yes, it definitely keys into the failures who nevertheless make a name out of that. And that felt like half a sentence, but I'm stopping there.
No, I'm with you. What I find that is a very precarious choice for creators when they create a character like him, who is not someone to envy. It's not someone to put up on a pedestal. No. But and in some ways to loathe, right? There's things that he does in that show that you're like, you are a terrible human being. You are not a good person. But somehow still make them sympathetic and somehow make us still root for them. That is not easy to do. And when it's done well, it's phenomenal.
Yes. Yeah. And in that instance, you can tell that deep down that Lamb has been through some horrible. He has clearly suffered for his art, in what where he has got to. But that isn't what you see. You're not keyed into his background. That's kind of the whole point.
Right.
It's you get more glimpses of it in the TV series than you do in the book by far. In the book, he is much more that even less about Lamb. That's clearly come out into the series. But it is, you're right. He's not somebody to aspire to be, but at the same time, there is a fascination and a almost an admiration for somebody who can make out a career out of being just wrong.
It's hard. I find it very hard, Paul, to verbalize that. But I did. I connected with him, and there are times where I question that and like, why do I care what happens to this person? Because really only bad things should happen to this person, right? If karma really works. But you find pieces of him that do a show recently that I think did another great job of this is, did you ever watch Succession? The HBO show?
No, I haven't watched it. No. Oh, I am aware of it.
Put that on your list.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. And the reason being is that it instead of having one Lamb, we have like 6 of them, right? We have 6 people who are individually not very good people. But somehow we find connections with each of these characters. We find things that we sympathize for and understand. And I think that's the heart of that show. So there's my unsolicited recommendation for you, Paul.
Marvelous.
You should check out Succession.
Yeah.
Paul, there's a lot of really cool things to do on a Sunday night, like catch up on Slow Horses, but you decided to spend it with me, and I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great.
For those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You listened to the whole damn show, and I appreciate you doing that. Take care. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.